Hi everyone, welcome to our live webinar, Digital in-Store, How Interactive Applications Are Changing an Industry. My name is Rachel Ramba and I'm your webinar admin. I'm really excited to share that today you're going to learn more about the award-winning Polaris retail experience that includes the design, the deployment, measurement, and even future development. A couple of housekeeping items before we introduce our experts. First, I've muted the lines to keep background noise to a minimum. However, I do really encourage your participation. So please go ahead and chat questions through the window. I'll moderate, and at the end, we'll address questions with whatever time we have remaining. All right, let's get started. Today's discussion will be led by ELO's Luke Wilverding and Reflex Mason Page. Luke leads ELO's North America field sales team, and Mason leads strategy at Reflex. Welcome, gentlemen. Luke, can you tell us a little bit more about ELO?
I certainly can. Good afternoon. So ELO is a leading global supplier of interactive solutions with over 25 million installations in over 80 countries since the company was founded in 1971. A very rich history in interactive. ELO's product portfolio includes a broad selection of interactive displays and form factors ranging from 10 to 70, along with all-in-one computers and point-of-sale products and peripherals, which we call Edge Connect. They include cameras, scanners, biometrics, payment capabilities, creating a set of building blocks for an endless number of solutions, you could say. And last but not least, ELO has also developed a capability called ELO View, which enables you to connect and control our products, simplifying deployment, management, and support of products out in the wild, I'd say. Our hashtag is ELO is everywhere, and you can find our solutions everywhere from self-service kiosks to point-of-sale terminals to interactive signage, gaming, hospitality, medical, transportation, among many other verticals and use cases. So hopefully, Rachel, that's a quick overview of ELO.
Excellent. Thanks, Luke. All right, Mason, can you tell us a little bit more about Reflex, please?
Yes, you bet. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Mason Page, and I'm excited to be speaking with you all today. About Reflect, well, really simply put, we are digital signage experts. So we are really good at bringing digital experiences into physical spaces. And we were born out of software about 20 years ago, and so we have a really robust CMS that we use to deliver content and experiences down into the market. And one of the things that really sets us apart, and we're going to talk a lot about today in the webinar, is just how we like to start with strategy. Start with a purpose, start with why, because we really preach that every screen should have a purpose, and I feel like this case study is a great example of that approach. So certainly excited to dig in with you all.
Great. Thank you, Mason. And on that point, why are we all here today? Well, we're here to talk about the Polaris retail experience. And this is a really impressive interactive digital deployment. It's won numerous awards, much deserved recognition, including a 2019 Digi Award and a 2018 ICX Elevate Award. So today, Mason and Luke will help you understand, not only why is this an award-winning project, but also why it's had such a tremendous impact on the bottom line for Polaris and on sales. Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's take a look at some of the photos of this experience as it exists out in retail dealerships today. It's a little hard to see the screen on this one, but if you look on the right-hand side under the Make It Your Own, you can see that's where it's built into the wall there. So that photo tour helps us make sure that we're all on the same page. And with that, let's dive into the details. In this webinar, Luke will lead a Q&A style session with Mason to talk about the challenges that Polaris faced, the solution that's been deployed, and the staggering results that the brand has seen so far. So with that, Luke, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Rachel. Well, first of all, I'll say, as a person that loves anything with a motor, this use case is near and dear to me, so very exciting. So Hey, Mason, how are you?
I'm doing great. Excited to chat through this.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in here to some questions. So I guess starting off, Mason, what problems or issues was Polaris addressing when they reached out to you about digital in-store?
Yeah, and I love telling this story. So with Polaris, we met about 3.5 years ago. And when we met, they really were struggling with what they called just an overall bad retail experience. So Polaris, as you saw in the photos, they sell really awesome off-road vehicle products, and they sell them through a network of dealerships. But the catch is Polaris doesn't own any of these dealerships. They simply provide them with great products, and then they try to make them the best merchandisers and salespeople they possibly can. But as you go through these dealerships, just the overall customer experience was lacking. And they call their dealership a sea of handlebars, in that it's also unique because almost every single dealership that sells Polaris sells competitive products as well. So you'll go in and you'll see a Polaris that's next to a Honda, that's next to a Kawasaki, and there's no definable Polaris space. So all in all, just the general retail environment was struggling. And so Polaris, they're a very strategic organization, which is near and dear to my heart on the strategy side of the Reflect business. And so what they did is they adopted an approach of research. And so through that research, they learned that the buyers and the people who are promoting their brand, they saw that they were more likely to engage with technology, and that technology could really help them to convey features and benefits. So those were good information came out of research around these problems, and they teased out 3 key insights, which were really the guiding light for the in-store development. And number 1 was their vehicles are the star of the show. So make sure that we always feature the vehicles big and bad in the retail environment. They needed to support the sales process, so make it easier for people to sell Polaris versus other products. And then do a better job positioning the brand in the dealership. And so they had lots of challenges, but again, it was great because we had a clean slate. We were able to start with strategy, understand their business, and really get in on the ground floor about what their buyers need in order to convert, and then the types of tools that the sellers need in order to help them to sell.
Mason, that makes a lot of sense. So we know Reflect is an expert in design and execution of these types of digital experiences. So we'd love your help understanding why you recommended Interactive for this particular Polaris project, and then some of the criteria when considering, I'll call it static signage or non-interactive signage versus an interactive type deployment.
Yeah, well, the strategic engagement, that initial relationship, when we were learning a lot about their business and their shoppers and their customers, we went through a pretty robust concept phase. And in that concept phase, we looked at a lot of passive digital experiences, and we looked at all different kinds of use cases and form factors for interactive experiences. And when we really took a step back, we created this mantra. And this mantra was really used to guide the strategy, and it was simply to help the buyers buy and the sellers sell. Help the buyers buy and the sellers sell. And when we thought about, well, how can technology help a buyer buy and a seller sell? And per the research, how can we support this sales process, give them tools that they could use? That's when an interactive style application really seemed to make a lot of sense. And concurrently with this discovery work, the Polaris team was doing an awesome job investing in their online experience. And they were working on 3D modeling of their vehicles and were dipping toes into the customization and personalization aspect for their vehicles. And so we saw kind of that aha moment of, hey, what if we took some of these best practices and some of these assets that are going to exist online and bake them into what could be a really rich interactive deployment?
Wow. So that's really interesting. And obviously interactivity is near and dear to us. So the next question is really around the use case inside of the dealership in terms of how the engagement from a employee versus a self-service engagement from a customer. I mean, how do you draw that line between just full self-service and assisted selling, let's say?
Yeah, well, I think I'd love to talk through assisted selling first. And I think what's really important is to think about what we're saying when we say assisted selling. So obviously this approach relies heavily upon the salesperson to be effective. So a big part of that is ensuring that you have a sales team who can be trained on how to use it. And you also need customers who want to engage with a salesperson. So as we know that some of the younger shoppers today, they don't want to talk to anyone. And if that's the case, if you don't know your shopper, then assisted selling can certainly fall flat on its face. So assisted selling is really good for more complex sales where a salesperson can clearly add value to the process. So when you look at selling things like, well, in this case, a $25,000 vehicle, or expensive kitchen appliances, or building your own engagement ring, things like that, where it can be a complex sale and where people are accustomed to interacting with a salesperson, technology can really help to bridge those gaps and overall enrich the experience. And for Polaris, again, they're in a competitive situation, so an assisted selling tool helped that brand to stand apart. And then also, especially in retail, the power sports industry is no different. They have really high turnover. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, but Polaris was able to use this as a training tool. So if you didn't know everything about Polaris and you're working with a customer, you can simply go over to the screen and touch it, and you've got a lot of specs and features and media at your fingertips, which again can help the retailer be a little bit more confident in their sale. So there's a little bit of on the assisted selling approach. I think for more customer-driven, that can be really great for just self-discovery. I think understanding if your shoppers, if they are expecting that type of experience or if they need that type of experience to reduce friction, to allow them to take something into their own hands, that can also be very fruitful. And we see a lot of sales increase around that and also basket size increase. So both of them are tools to accomplish something. I think making the decision between is it customer-driven or sales associate-driven is really about shopper behavior and what they need in order to convert. And as we look at these expensive vehicles, a salesperson does play a critical role in that.
Yeah, and Mason, I like how you talked about the different use cases in terms of actually a training tool or an assisted selling approach or self-service. So now you've got this great digital tool that's available to folks to use. How do you really draw somebody in to get them engaged and interacting with that tool?
Yeah, so I think we all agree that if you build it, they will come. That is really not applicable. And so I'm on the strategy side, and so everything comes back to why and purpose, and you really need to, when you're considering rolling out digital, you need to be involved in the ground floor. And a lot of that starts with working with the store designers or working with the merchandisers to map out the customer journey through the store, through the dealership, and make thoughtful recommendations about where digital should go throughout their journey so that you have a digital touch point that adds value and that digital touch point is serving a specific purpose. So placement is key. A lot of times we see and a lot of times we hear that beautiful stores are designed and then they'll say, well, let's put a screen there, let's put a screen there, and put a screen there because it'll look cool. And it's devoid of any insights on how that will basically enrich the shopper's journey. So getting in early and helping to direct where digital should go and why is critical. And then content is equally as important. So using rich motion graphics and animations to tell the story is really compelling and a critical part. So by and large, we've seen that digital signage can create 10 times more awareness than static signage. And the whole reason why is because it's visible and that it's using animations and motion graphics which inherently draw people's eyeballs over. And as part of the content, and this is what we did with Polaris as well, is sometimes shoppers don't know that they can touch it. And then sometimes, I'm sure we've all seen that shoppers will go up to a screen that you're not supposed to touch and you see fingerprints all over them. So with Polaris, the screen works really hard for the brand when the application's actually not being used, because part of the research, again, pointed that we needed to designate the Polaris area of the dealership. And so when the app's not being used, we play really cool content on the vehicles, on the products, but we also encourage shoppers to come up and touch it, and then we also show them what the application does. So we use motion graphics to show that, hey, you can actually build a really cool vehicle here using this app. Come over and touch it. And so we're not afraid to have shoppers engage with this without a salesperson. Again, it is an assisted selling experience. But just like with a lot of retailers, they have limited headcount. So when the dealerships get really busy on the weekends, they will say, hey, go over there and start playing around, pull up a build, and then someone will be over there to help you. So placement's key, and of course the content on the screen is really key to help draw people in and get them to engage.
Makes sense. It speaks to the versatility of interactivity there. So Mason, you and I had some time to talk about this experience ahead of time, and you spoke eloquently about the crawl, walk, run approach and the importance of proof of concept and pilot to roll out. Can you share some insights around that?
Yeah, and I think I'd like to go into a little bit greater detail when we talk about the solution, but the Polaris, again, they were a very strategically minded organization, and so the crawl, walk, run approach was really a requirement for them, and that's a best practice that we've established at Reflect, where the crawl is really a proof of concept, and we just wanted to test an idea. So almost like validating the research and what's the minimum viable product that we could put in the dealership to test. Does this help bring people over? Do salespeople like it? So we wanted to validate that, and then once we knew that yes, it was effective, then we moved more into that walk or pilot phase where we invested more time in more robust features, and we started to build the plumbing or infrastructure for our digital signage software to do more heavy lifting for the app. So it's a very methodical process, one that should be mapped out really from the get-go of, okay, well, what does a crawl, walk, run approach look like? And then what are the gates where we're going to say, yes, this is working, or no, this isn't working? And of course, how are we going to measure the success? And map it all out. And I think that's another reason why the dealerships are really excited about this tool, is because when we were entering into the proof of concept phase, we had already done a lot of the due diligence of what this thing would eventually become, and that's what we sold them on, and that's what we were able to get feedback on from them is, hey, as we continue to iterate, what do you want this thing to do? What, of all the bells and whistles I'm showing you, what's missing? And so we were able to organically optimized our plans just based on the feedback that we were getting during that proof of concept and pilot phase. So for now, I'll just say the proof of concept is a great starting block if you want to test an idea of, does this achieve X? And then from there, you definitely need to map out how you can move to walk and ultimately move to run.
It makes sense, Mason. So I'm kind of biased. I'm a big fan of interactivity. If you can reach it, you should be able to touch it, and it should do something for you. But you as a company that as a consultant, as a strategist, you have choice here. So when you think about using interactivity for this application, could you share just a little bit more about maybe some of the benefits that interactivity provided and some of those success indicators?
Yes, you bet. So when we look at, well, should this be an interactive experience, a lot of it starts with what the ultimate measure of success is. And again, what you understand the consumer expectations and consumer behavior to be. So when we start on the strategic level or we're coming up with concepts, again, we typically will entertain what a passive experience could be, what an interactive experience could be. But for Polaris specifically, the in-search and the conversations we were having with shoppers and the conversations we were having with dealerships really pointed us in the direction of interactivity. And this is, as I mentioned before, this is a more complex sell because not only are you buying an expensive vehicle, it's just like a car. They have almost countless accessories, and you can choose any color configuration of any accessory to really personalize your vehicle, and that's one of the things that really sets Polaris apart. So giving shoppers the ability to actually see what their vehicle would look like with the yellow roof, with the red doors, with the blue bumper, with the cooler in the back, it absolutely has increased sales of those types of products. So when and why do we use interactive? It is serving a specific purpose. It is either going to reduce friction or enrich the process, and ultimately, hopefully, that will lead to success for the client. And if it's in terms of sales lift, great. If it's in terms of a better guest experience, which is a little bit of a softer metric, great. But in this case, we wanted to use something interactive and give dealers a reason to sell Polaris, because we made it easier for them to sell Polaris than any of their competitive products.
There's so many use cases now. I mean, obviously the creativity is flowing right here in terms of how many different types of businesses could be better influenced, let's say, through interactivity. So with that, Rachel, I think you've got some things to show us.
Yes, thanks, Luke. I'll jump now. I want to do our first of 2 poll questions for the audience. Let me tee that up on the screen. For the audience, you should be seeing a question and several answers. Go ahead and answer if that's applicable. If you are a technology reseller instead of an end customer, you can feel free to either skip the question or answer for a customer that you work with. That question is, when are you considering implementing digital in-store? We'll give it just a minute as people go ahead and answer. You all should be able to see the results tallying up on the screen. It looks like sooner rather than later is the consensus for the group here. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. Thanks for everybody who participated in that poll. Next up are a couple of videos to show you a little bit of a deeper dive into the user interface. Mason, I'll go ahead and tee up the first video, and I'll let you tell our audience what we're watching.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Rachel. And so we've talked a little bit about the challenge, and I wanted to actually show the solution here, and hopefully this video is coming across okay. This really starts off as an endless aisle type of experience. And like with a lot of retailers that are selling vehicles or not selling vehicles, they have limited space with which to show products. So obviously the website helps with that, but Polaris really wanted a way to showcase all the vehicles that they have at their disposal. And Rachel, if there's a way for you to play it again, that'd be fantastic. And so through the assisted selling approach, what we would do is the sales associate at this point with what you see, we're going to drill down because you've likely already done some research. You may know that you want a RZR. And then again, you can see all these vehicle cards that have images and then high-level information on the vehicle. So as I figure out that, hey, you love to fish, you've got a couple of kids, I know you live in this geographic area, I can start to talk with you about a specific product. And again, this is a really good sales crutch for the sales associate who either may be new or new to the Polaris brand. And on the right-hand side, you can see there's some price and stats about the vehicle. And then across the bottom, we have rich media and imagery that can be pulled up and enlarged. So really a lot of the visual sales tools that are needed are right here at the fingertips of the salesperson and of the user. But the real sizzle comes from this personalization and customization. So in the upper right-hand corner, there's a Build Your Own button, and as soon as you hit that button, it launches the vehicle configurator. So across the top, we have navigation of things like protection and tires and lighting. And so you can go through and simply start adding accessories, and they are dropped onto the vehicle in real time. And so you can continue to change colors, add accessories on, remove accessories, and then you can zoom in, zoom out, look in the inside, look at the outside. So it's as I mentioned before, it's an awesome way to really see your creation. And so the Polaris has some of these accessories actually on display. So someone can really easily say, well, let's take a look at the vehicle with these doors. Or let's take a look at the vehicle with this red hood. And so this is a great way to go over and allow the shopper to actually see their creation. And then the other piece, I don't know if you all can make it out, but in the upper right-hand corner, there's a price. So we start off with the MSRP, and as you go through and add the accessories to your vehicle, you're actually building a shopping cart. And then you can access that shopping cart and see an itemized list of the accessories, your price, and then you can have your build either texted to you or emailed to you, because a lot of people, they need to check with their significant others before they make this huge purchase. And so we make it really easy for the shopper to take the build with them, access it through their mobile device or through their email, and then they can continue their build online. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better understanding of the actual UX behind the experience.
Yeah, Mason, this is impressive, and we talk a lot about personalization and customization and the benefits that provide, and wow, this just digs right into that. So with any one of these types of projects, let's say, it's always important to discuss how you're going to measure success and work through that. Can you share some of the success criteria and how that might have been used when designing the solution? And then furthermore, does Interactive provide some unique measurement opportunities for a solution like this?
Sure. Well, make no mistake about it, the ultimate success measure for Polaris was increase vehicle sales and increase the sales of parts, garments, and accessories. So they call that PG&A, parts, garments, and accessories. And so one of the things that was really important as we were selecting dealerships for the pilot is that they had to be forthcoming with their sales information so that we could truly understand, is this experience selling more vehicles and selling more parts, garments, and accessories? And just candidly, we work with a lot of clients where the goal is sales lift, but they're not willing, for one reason or another, to share sales metrics. And so it's really hard to calculate ROI, to understand payback, and to really put a value on the program when you don't get that information sharing. And so Polaris was awesome in establishing that expectation with dealerships up front. And then when you look at interactivity, you just get all kinds of really rich information. So we know how many times the app is used. It's very similar reporting to what you can get on a website. Our applications use Google Analytics, so we can look at sessions, pathways, media consumed. It is very easy for us to slice and dice the application usage by dealers. So I know who the top 5 power users are of the app. I know who the top 5 power builders are of the app. And so we can glean a lot of information about usage from the dealers, but also just from an aggregate level of how the application is being used. And I mentioned when I was talking a little bit about Reflect is that we have our own digital signage software, and software is really important if you want to measure how the app is performing. So without using digital signage software and an internet connection, there's really no way for you to get the rich insights on how the application is being used. So you want to think about if you're going to be able to network this so that you can get the rich measurements of all the different bells and whistles that the app is producing. So there, really good information there, and then that really fills out more of the quantitative side. So for me, whenever possible, I love to look at the quantitative and the qualitative sides side by side. So you've got the quantitative and the data, but we've got so many good insights about what this application should be and how it should evolve, and the results from the qualitative side. So we have talked to dealers, we have issued surveys to dealers, and you'll just be amazed at how much you learn when you just ask. So talk to your employees, talk to your customers, understand the pain points, understand their wish list, and then just use those insights to continue to iterate on the program.
Yeah, so some smart thinking there. So next question, we've all heard about the terms, and we mentioned this earlier, sort of the crawl, walk, run approach. When embarking on a platform like this or a digital experience like this, how do you advise your customer of the expectations, let's say, and what you would recommend to others that might be pursuing a similar path?
Yeah, so I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, and I think we can go into a little bit more detail. And again, if you've got questions on this, for the audience, please feel free to type them in because I know that this can make people's heads spin a little bit. But the approach is pretty simplistic when you just think about the proof of concept. Again, is an idea. You're testing an idea. And some of our clients, they want to just throw the website up on their interactive touchscreen and call it a day. There are lots of reasons why that is a bad idea, but that can actually be a good idea for a proof of concept. If you want to understand, is your screen in the right place, or will having this type of information at the fingertips of a salesperson or at a shopper, will that help you achieve your goal, whatever your goal might be? So the website can be effective for a proof of concept. I think typically websites, they are not built to provide the optimum UX in a retail environment. And also a website and an in-store touch application typically serve distinctly different purposes. So you want to try to have something purpose-built, but for testing an idea of does this achieve X, a website or a very simple self-contained test can work really well. And then for us, that was kind of the first gate, is what are the dealers saying about it, and is this helping sellers to sell? And once we checked those boxes of yes, then we made an intentional decision to invest in the vehicle configurator, start to use software more robustly, and open up the plumbing to where this application, from being a small, not necessarily self-contained, but a smaller content app, to being much bigger, much more dynamic, and using software a lot more to keep the content fresh. And so getting something stood up for a proof of concept or a pilot is great, but sustainability is really the key of how are you going to feed the beast with content, how are you going to measure it. So for the pilot phase, which is really what we've concluded with Polaris, where we have about 60 dealerships, we've got a really rich bed of learnings on how this is being used. And we know that we have the infrastructure, we have established the operational efficiencies that we need to ultimately roll this out to scale. Polaris is currently sold in about 1,800 dealerships across the country. And so we were very methodical in working to map out, well, now that we know that the pilot has worked, how do we need to continue to evolve the application, and what else do we need to modify to where we can take this to scale? And again, a big part of that is around asset management, content updates. How are you going to support it? So going from 1 to 5 instances of a proof of concept to, we'll just say 50 for a pilot, to 1,500 in production. How are you going to support it? And what tools do you have in order to measure and report back on success? So those are really key considerations as you move through the steps. And then what Polaris has done a really good job at, and what a lot more brands who are interested in this type of experience, they're really starting to glob around this single point, which is really smart. And it's build something once and use it multiple times. And so when you look at how we're modeling the Polaris vehicle, the website and this application are talking to the same source. And so as we worked with Polaris to build a vehicle configurator, we're using it multiple times. And so we're talking to other brands who are interested in creating these robust interactive experiences because they want to move into more of a pilot type of experience, but they don't want to build multiple instances for the same type of experience. So try to find ways where you can build something once and then repurpose the assets, repurpose the content, repurpose the design where possible, and that'll help you to gain a lot of efficiencies as you move through the crawl, walk, run approach.
Yeah, Mason, it's one thing to do something just for one location. It's a whole other thing, it sounds like, to do it for 1,500 locations. So it's exciting to hear you talk about the proof of concept and how you scaled this in a way that can expand now to meet all of these different locational needs. Along those lines, so at ELO, we offer products from 10-inch all the way to 70-inch, let's say, and the joke would be size does matter, and we believe it's important, and smaller screens are oftentimes more of a private conversation where the larger screens create these really public experiences. So with that said, how did you land on the particular size that you did and sort of the impact that it provided for this experience for Polaris?
Well, we used a 55-inch ELO touchscreen for this, and 55 inches was really a great size because, believe it or not, it's actually pretty big when you consider a retail setting. But just this being a purpose-built experience as an assisted selling tool, the shopper and the sales associate were literally meant to be shoulder to shoulder. And so we wanted something that was very comfortable for them to use. And then from a design experience, we wanted to have the majority of the touch points available from one of the sides because we didn't want the sales associate to have to run from one side to the other and cross over in front of the shopper. And the 55-inch, so it was really good for collaboration, and it was also a really good size to be that beacon, that brand beacon within a pretty cluttered retail environment to draw people's attention and start to tell the Polaris story. And size does matter, as you said, but bigger always isn't better because we did look at larger screens. I mean, I know ELO makes some really big 75-inch plus screens, but we don't want to have people standing on their tiptoes or bending their knees in order to reach touch points. So those really large screens can be awesome for interactive applications. Again, it really comes down to how they're designed to make sure that all the touch points are in a place that's very comfortable and easy to reach. But for us, we felt like 55 was great to help us capture attention and then gave plenty of room for people to collaborate on the screen.
Yeah, I really like the thought that went into the shoulder-to-shoulder kind of selling model here and how those touch points were enabled for that associate to be effective through that digital conversation, you could say. So, Mason, you shared a ton of great insights here and kind of a walk through how this started out as the idea and is now deployed. But are there things that we really haven't talked about or mentioned that are important to project success?
I think one of the things that Polaris and some of their other sub-brands are starting to consider is what are additional ways to offset costs. So right now, sales lift is, I mean, it's awesome, but a lot of brands are looking for the gravy on top. And so what are ways that our clients and other brands can put gravy on top through advertising and sponsorships? And so for Polaris, when you look at the tire manufacturers, the helmet manufacturers, the accessory manufacturers who want to increase sales, they want to pay for placements, pay for sponsored real estate within this app. That's something that Polaris is taking a really keen look at. So for you all, advertising and sponsorships can help offset operating costs when it comes to digital experiences. However, asterisk, never do that to the degradation of the customer experience. Because if they feel like your digital experience has turned into an advertising network, you will shut them down. And I know we all hear the word transparency, it seems, every other day, and that's very inauthentic to shoppers, and it doesn't feel transparent when they're in your store and you're bombarding them with advertising. So it needs to be tasteful and well thought through. As far as some pitfalls, some best practices, we have certainly fallen on our face many times, but we have learned a lot. I think one of our mantras here at Reflect is ensure that every screen has a purpose. Just challenge your teams with that. It must have a purpose, and it must be able to be measured. Because I've talked to a lot of brands where they've got a touch screen and they've got their website on the touch screen, and you say, well, is it working? And they can't answer you. So you don't find yourself in that position. Make sure it has a purpose and you know that you can measure it. And then consider the crawl, walk, run approach, because ultimately it'll save you time, money, and as you go through that approach, you're going to uncover a lot of really cool ways to optimize the experience going forward. So don't take the ready, fire, aim approach. Think about a methodical crawl, walk, run approach to your digital program. And then I know we've talked a lot about assisted selling. Just be mindful of, are your salespeople the right people to come alongside a shopper and do this? And power sports people are very passionate, and so they are an intricate part of the sales process. And we use training to help with that. So before dealerships open and after dealerships close, this interactive touchscreen turns into a training tool where associates can use a different version of the app still on the same screen, And we walk them through what the application does, and more importantly, how to use the application as part of the sales process. When do you bring someone over to the screen, and how do you use it based on where they are in their purchase cycle? So we try to give them all the ammo that they need to be the best salespeople possible. So training is really important. And then just consider investment in content. That would be the content and measurement. Those are the last two. I know personally, and I know with our clients, hardware is so big and beautiful and impressive, and ELO makes great products. Invest in the right hardware. It is such an important tool to accomplishing your objectives, but do not neglect proper investment in content and an undying commitment to measurement.
So, Mason, I'll simply say it's all about the results. So with that, if you can kind of share the success of this project in terms of Polaris, and really, I'd love to hear just kind of your opinion and what you feel that was most successful here as well.
Sure, and I'll try to wrap this up and land the plane to make sure that we have some time for questions. So if everyone's looking at the slide on the left-hand side, as we look at just the design, and we tried to be very methodical in creating something that tied back to the research, and I feel like we were able to check a lot of the boxes around highlighting the brand, supporting the sales process. And when you look at why people are coming into retail environments, yes, they want to see and touch and feel products. In this case, these are the vehicles, but they want smart recommendations. They want personalized experiences, and this application was able to do that for them, and also generate leads. And as I mentioned before, shoppers can come in and then they can take the build with them through a mobile text or through email. But the dealership gets that same information, and it goes into their CRM, and so it was able to generate leads and then follow-ups for the dealership. So the experience tied back really nicely to the insights that we garnered through the research. And then on the success metrics, I mentioned that we were really living and dying by the sales lift, and we had double-digit sales lift on parts, garments, and accessories, and double-digit sales lift on the vehicles. And the results, I feel like we had some fantastic results. Every time I talk about these results, I personally almost fall out of my chair because they're pretty unprecedented. And then the other success metrics around the training, when we issue the surveys, we do that about every 3 to 6 months. The dealers testify that the training really helps them. Again, they're not any different from retail. They suffer from turnover. And so the ability to continue to help people understand how to use this app to be more successful salespeople has been really critical. And then as we've gone from proof of concept to pilot, and now we're moving into production, keeping everything fresh and up to date is so critical from a content perspective, but also how we're tying into databases to pull in assets. And again, our software is able to go out, grab these assets, grab copy points, grab price points, and bring them in and digest them into the app. And so it really makes the program run a lot more efficiently. Because without that, going to any kind of scale is really, really challenging.
Mason, I think if we had the lines unmuted, you would have heard gasps and jaw drops, because obviously that type of sales lift, that's what every executive or leader, I'm sure, wants for their store sales. And to implement tools that can successfully do that, that's just incredible. So, Mason, I really appreciate, obviously, your participation here and sharing all of this valuable information. We did have some questions that came in through the chat window. So why don't I ask a couple questions from the audience here? I'm going to combine one of them here. But so did Polaris end up having to spend additional costs for getting a network connection power, I'll call it just the overall connectivity, to enable digital as a part of a dealership environment?
Great question. And the initial answer was actually no, in that the proof of concept really didn't require internet. So we didn't have any elements of the application that were really being fed dynamically through using software. Again, we were really testing an idea, and the app worked really well with or without internet. Still, we wanted those experiences to be wired, but that was not a requisite. However, once we moved to pilot, then we did need internet, we did need power, and so Polaris worked with the dealerships to have data and power set up behind the screen. The screen was part of they were doing a merchandise refresh inside the dealerships as well, and so Polaris was doing all of that in one foul swoop. They would come in, update the merchandising, they would run the data and power, and then hook the app up. So it was an additional expense to the dealer, but that expense was part of the package that they bought from Polaris for the merchandising, the screen, and the application.
Okay, and there was a question around specific costs, but I don't think we want to get into that type of a question here on this call, but something certainly if there are interest there, they could follow up afterwards. Another question that came along that was interesting was, can you add payment to this application? So could you actually buy a garment from the screen? Is that a direction or strategy?
Man, that's a good question. So could you? Yes. And I know ELO has a lot of products where we could bolt something on and have that work. So yes. And I don't think we're talking about vehicles, because if any of you can put one of these on your Amex, I'm very impressed. But yes, for parts, garments, and accessories, you could have it there. But in this type of shopping environment, they don't have typically it's really like buying a car in that you'll typically meet with a finance person. You'll talk about service plans, you'll talk about maintenance and things like that. So there aren't long lines to stand in if you're trying to buy an accessory or a shirt or a hat or something like that. It's pretty in-out because a lot of the transacting is actually taking place back of house. But when we talk about assisted selling, and I know we've been very focused on retail in this conversation, having that type of payment option can be very smart. And I think, again, it's all about knowing your shoppers and knowing what they want and what they expect. If they want to get in and get out, then let them pay right there. If they don't want to get in and get out and you created an environment that has more browsing and longer dwell times in your store, then you may not need it. So as far as does it warrant the investment, I really feel like it ties back to what your customers are looking for. But tactically, it's fantastic. If your people want to pay, let them pay.
Makes sense. Well, and here's a great one. How long did the total project take from the proof of concept to the rollout to the total completion?
Woo, all right, good question. Like I mentioned at the top, we've been working together for about 3.5 years. It was about a little over a year from the time I met a Polaris person at a trade show. We were at a conference down in Austin, Texas. It was about a year from the time we met till we had a proof of concept live, because we went through a lot of the strategy conversations. We went through our concepting phase where we played the what if game. Well, what if we had a passive screen here, and what if we had a screen here, and what if we had 3 screens here, and until we finally netted out on this concept. So it was about a year. Meanwhile, in the background, Polaris was working on the 3D modeling for their vehicles, and that process was about an 18-month process. So we didn't evolve from proof of concept into a full rollout with the 3D aspect. We'll just say it was roughly another year, something like that. And then, so we've had this full experience in market with the builder for about a year and a half. So I'm sorry if my timelines aren't perfectly aligned there, but hopefully, generally, that helps.
Well, and just from my thinking of this, I mean, obviously the success that you're having doesn't necessarily happen overnight. There's a lot of thought that goes into this to ensure that you can see the types of lift and success that you've shown here. I think we've got enough time maybe for one more here, but how about choosing a pilot location? A question came across in terms of where do you start?
Yeah, so pilot locations. Typical rule of thumb, it definitely varies based on the brand. A 10% subset of if we're talking retail, of your fleet of stores is typically good if you want to do 10%. And you want to try to find locations that are representative of your whole fleet of stores. So for example, if you have stores in Spanish-speaking markets and up in the Northeast and in the South where you have different types of shoppers or different store layouts, in your pilot you want to spread it wide enough to where you've got enough instances of digital, enough instances of an interactive application to where statistically it can represent your whole fleet of stores. And from that, if you are using 10%, you're going to get a lot of those learnings and insights that can then be used to optimize the experience when you move out of the pilot phase. So long answer. The short answer, typically it's around 10%, and typically you want to try to find a subset that's representative of your whole fleet of stores.
Well, it sounds like there's some thought that goes into that as well. Well, Mason, we're coming up right on time here. I can't thank you enough for sharing this incredible award-winning use case with Polaris in addition to using ELO for it. So with that, let me turn this back over to Rachel.
Thanks to you both. What a great story. I hope the audience enjoyed it. On the screen, you'll see email addresses for both Mason and Luke. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to be in touch. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. And with that, we'll go ahead and say goodbye. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Mason.
Bye-bye.